power rule, and also the power of a product rule, which is what we learned before. All right, so the product of power rule was when our exponents are multiplying against each other and we add the exponents. But our power of power rule, notice how there's a parentheses there and there's an exponent out the parentheses. We talked about before when you were like 5th grade, 6th grade PEMDAS, where the P stands for parentheses and that E stands for exponents. And so we're always going to pay attention to the parentheses first to apply those exponent rules, and this just so happened to be the power of power rule. So the power of power rule states that when we are raising an exponent to the next power, we are now multiplying those exponents against each other. Remember, we're going to keep in mind the rules that we've learned previously before, such as the product of power rule, which is the first one. The zero rule, which is anything raised to the zero is 1, and that negative rule, because we don't want anyone unhappy. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our first example here. And here's our first example. Sorry about that. All right. We have 3ab squared times to the squared, and then times 2a to the third power b times to the third power. All right, so we're going to go ahead and dissect this first by doing this portion here. And if we pay attention to this portion here, if we go by the power of powers rules, the powers of power rules said that this squared is going to have to be applied to everything. So if I rewrite this, I have 3 squared times a squared times b squared times 2. And then that's why because that is an invisible 1 right there. So it's just a 1 times 2. Okay, so you can see that. And so now I'm done with that square. I can do the other part. And they're still all multiplying. I'll do that in another color so we can see that one a little better. So we're going to do the other side, which is this part right here. And so now this one is saying 2 to the third power times a 3 times 3 and b 1 times 3, because there's an invisible 1 right there. So now we're going to apply that last rule where we combine, right? So our coefficients are 3 squared and 2 to the third power, which we could use our calculator to do that, but I know 3 times 3 is 9. And 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 times 2 is 8. So we can literally simplify that to a 72. All right, so now I have a squared times a to the 9th, because 3 times 3 is 9. And when we do this rule right here, remember this rule right here, I'm going to go ahead and separate these. When we're doing this rule right here, when we multiply, remember the rule was we put that plus in between. Only time we put a multiply in between is when we have that parentheses. There's no parentheses, so we're going to add 2 plus 9, which is going to give us that a to the 11th power. And then, last but not least, we're going to go ahead. So we did our a's, we did our coefficients. Now we're left with our b's. So we have b, 2 times 2 is 4, and 1 times 3 is 3. Put a plus in between. So 4 plus 3 is 7, so that gives us b to the 7th power. And now we're simplified this finished. Let's look at the next one. All right, so notice now we're still going to use our PEMDAS. So I'm going to rewrite this -3. And then I'm going to that, I know because I have a parentheses here, this is going to be multiplying. So I got b 3 times 2. And so if I go to the next one, everything is inside the parentheses. So that means everything is raised to that power. All right, so I still put my multiplication symbol in between so we're not forgetting about that. So I have negative 2 squared. Then I have this 4 times that 2 because there's a parentheses in between. So that squared has to be applied to everything inside that parentheses. Let me write this B a little bit better. That looks a little weird. All right. So then, now we're going to go ahead and do our multiplication here. And we're going to have our numbers first, like we always do. So I have a negative 3 times negative 2 squared. Well, negative 2 squared is the same thing as saying negative 2 times negative 2. And a negative make a positive. So I'm doing negative 3 times 4, which would give me a negative 12. And we're going to put our bracket in between. And then the only thing I have left is my b's. So 3 times 2 is 6. And 4 times 2 is 8. And I put my plus. So I know that gives me b to the 14th power. And I am finished. If you're wondering, well, Miss Corbin, there's a negative 12 there. Doesn't it go to the denominator? The negative rule only applies to the exponents. Because our exponent is a positive 14, that does not apply to the negative rule. Let's look at 2 more examples and move forward. For this first one here, we're raising everything still to the 2nd power. So what we're doing, we're saying is x 3 to the 7th power times 2. And now anything, when we have fractions, I'm just going to turn that 2 to a 2 over 1. It's still 2. And I'm going to multiply across, right? So 3 times 2 is 6. And 7 times 1 is 7. And so now I'm finished. Okay, remember they're still multiplying because there's a parentheses there. Last example. We're going to leave that 1/3 alone. It's not inside of the parentheses, so it's not included in this. So I'm going to put my 1/3 in my times. However, 6 is inside the parentheses, and it's saying it's being raised by this 2 right here. So that means 6 has to be raised to the 2nd power. X to the 2nd power has to be raised to the 2nd power, and we know in between it's times. Y1 has to be also multiplied by 2. And then notice here, we're going to put an invisible 1. Anything raised to the 1 is just itself. So we're just literally going to rewrite this. 2 times x to the 3rd times y to the 4th. And now we're going to combine. Let's start with, I'll use different colors here. This one has a little more. We'll start with our numbers. We have 1/3. We have 6 squared. And we have a 2. All right, so 6 squared, let's start with 6 squared. 6 squared is 6 times 6, which is 36. I'm going to also show you real quick how we just do this in Desmos. For those of us who love using Desmos, I know we do. Let's head over to Desmos. Remember, we're going to go ahead and go to Star Desmos. We're going to make sure we're using that green Desmos. And I'm going to go ahead and split the screen here, so we can see our problem there and how we utilize our calculator. So we have 1/3 times 6 to the 2nd power times 2. And so we have a 24. All right, so when we are doing this, we're literally going to write 24. And those are our coefficients. Let's start with the next one. So our next one we have is our x's. Remember, we go in alphabetical order. So x goes first. So x, 2 times 2 is 4. So we have x to the 4th times x to the 3rd. I'm going to put my plus in between. So that's where we get that x to the 7th power from. And then last but not least, we have, we do this one in purple, our y's. So we have y, 1 times 2 is 2. And y to the 4th. So if we add those together, 2 plus 4 is 6. And then that becomes our final answer. All right, just real quick, we could have also did the same thing in the calculator. I'm going to show you that really quick with decimals. Let's say you didn't know what 3 to the 7th power times 2 was, or squared was. We'd have to put those in parentheses. And we want to raise it to the 2nd power and keep it as a fraction, right? And boom. It should be multiplying. Let's just do that by multiply by 2. There we go. Okay, because those are the exponent rules. We're actually just multiplying it. All right. Same thing here. We were doing our coefficients. We can only use our calculator to do our coefficients, or if you need to multiply your exponents because they're getting really big, you can use it for those too. So if I did 3 squared and I also did 2 to the 3rd power, we would still get that same 72 that we got here. So I'm literally just showing you how you can use your decimal for your coefficients if needed. So our coefficient here was a -3, and then we multiplied it by a -2 to the 2nd power, and you see how we still have, put this in parentheses. There we go. So it's important that we put that in parentheses. That -12. All right. And we're going to put it inside parentheses because it's also inside parentheses here. That's super important. So the same thing, why I put that in parentheses, that's why we're also putting it into parentheses. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video just as much as I enjoyed you. I'll see you next time.